थैंक यू गुड इवनिंग एवरीबॉडी। मनीष जी ने आज का प्रोग्राम का शेड्यूल ऐसा बनाया कि पहले मशीन के बारे में समझो, फिर मशीन कलरेंट बनाओ। My name is R Rao. I'm here to share my thoughts on making of machine colorants. When somebody is buying a paint, तो which attribute comes to the mind of the customer? Cost के बारे में, quality के बारे में, या durability के बारे में? Most probably 8 out of 10 times shade के बारे में पहला ख्याल आता है, पहला color select होती है, फिर quality, फिर price, durability, etc. etc. So what does it mean? It means to successfully sell a product, it's important to market the color. And it is also equally important to make the color available to the customer in the shortest possible time. How do we do that? बहुत ही simple सी चीज़ है, which is known to most of us here. There are 3 ways in which a paint can be colored. पहली बात तो ये है कि हम factory में tint करते हैं, which we call as in-plant tinting. Secondly, we use universal stainers, जहाँ painter at the site जाकर उसको tint करते हैं और अपना the surface को paint करते हैं. And the last one is to use a machine colorant to tint at the point of sale outlets. Out of these 3 systems of coloring the paint, the most effective and the popular one is, of course, tinting the paint using a POS system. What does it mean? POS system क्या है? इसका complexities क्या है? How does one get into this known or unknown devil is what I'll try to explain in the next 10-15 minutes or so. Let's understand what this POS system is all about. What are the elements involved in it? सबसे पहले तो technology. We need to have an understanding of what the colorant is and how do we structure the base paint. इसके बाद में हमें चाहिए a mechanism by which we can deliver a precise metered quantity of colorant into the base paint. So we require a dispensing machine. Then we need something to mix it. So we require a shaker. We need a software to make sure that the right formulation is dispensed to give the right color. We also need a color palette so that the customer is offered a range of shades that he would select from. And last but not the least, one also need to consider whether हमें एक colorant बनाना चाहिए या दूसरे से खरीदना चाहिए. Out of these 6 elements which constitutes a decision-making process as far as a POS system is concerned, there are 2 main important things. One is the technology, second is the decision on to make or buy the colorant. बाकी सारे चीज़ जो है, like a dispenser, shaker, the formulations, the software, the shade cards and all can be outsourced easily. So let me spend some time on understanding what is this technology involved in making these colorants. And most importantly, when it comes to commercial decisions, how do we take a decision whether to make the colorant or to buy from somebody else? If you're buying from somebody else or even if you're making it ourselves, what are the considerations और हमें क्या करना है? The technology is very simple. On the face of it, it is not significantly different from what all of you are used to. The basic process is the same. There is a pigment. There is an additive to wet and disperse. There are more additives to keep it humid or humectant as what we call. Then we got preservatives because it's a water-based system. And there are more additives to get some specific properties. That's not all. That's where the challenges comes in and it gets more and more interesting and more difficult to make an educated decision making when it comes to formulating the color. Let's take the pigments. How many pigment indexes are available in commercially in the market? Any idea? 50, 100, 200? Actually, there are more than 400 types of pigment indexes commercially available. So what pigments we select? It depends on what exactly we want to deliver. For example, if you take an yellow pigment, you have yellow 1, yellow 3, yellow 42, LO74, LO65, 83, 138, 151, 154. So there are multiple grades of pigments available. So the decision of selecting a pigment depends on what we want to achieve. The strength of the pigment, the durability, the resistance, the bleeding, stability, so on and so forth, are all play an important role in selecting a pigment. If you come to wetting agents, why do we add that? Pigment on their own cannot be dispersed without the aid of an agent which acts as an interface between different media which is present inside. उसमें क्या करना है हमें? What different grades of wetting agents are available? Is it just an anionic wetting agent, a non-anionic, a mix of everything, and hybrid, and so on and so forth? Is another major important decision one has to take when it comes to selecting of a wetting agent. Humectant, it's a very important characteristic. It's just not to prevent the evaporation of water or solvent at the time of manufacturing. Humectants also play an important role in keeping the colorant in a fluid state when it is put in a canister and does not allow the nozzle to choke, and thus preventing the paint droplet or the colorant droplet from dispensing when it is required to. So humectant has a very important role. When the humectants keep the colorant in a fluid state, what are the considerations? It has its own negative impact of block resistance, of washability. The low VOC and the high VOC considerations also comes in depending on which humectants we take in the formulation. So while deciding the formulation, हमें ये भी सोचना है कि what are the attributes that we want to put in a machine colorant. Accordingly, the humectant needs to be selected. Preservatives, all of us know a water-based system requires preservatives. In an earlier talk, somebody was talking about what are the different types of preservatives available and what is the impact of heat on the longevity or the effectiveness of the preservatives. So the considerations are the effectiveness of the preservative when the colorant is manufactured, where heat obviously gets imported during the process of manufacturing. And more importantly, agar ye jo preservative hoti hai, obviously it's a poison because it's what is going to prevent microorganisms from growing inside. Agar hum koi poison ko colorant में डालते हैं, तो restrictions क्या होती है उसमें? Whether it is meant only for agricultural use, certain poisons are totally bland, can we import those materials, so on and so forth, would also come into consideration when we consider a selection of a particular preservative. Other additives are required for very specific properties. शायद ये rheology हो, flow and leveling हो, viscosity हो, anti-settling properties, opacity, water softening properties, and any other attributes that we want to put into the colorant would also play a very important role in selecting an additive. एक बार हमने decide कर लिया कि कौन सा additive लेना है, then we comes to the issue of mixing all of them together to formulate a colorant. When you want to formulate, again we need to consider हमें क्या करना है, whether this colorant is more water-based, it is more solvent-based, or it is truly universal, that would govern the ratios and the type of different additives that we're going to use in making a particular machine colorant. In short, if I were to put up this matrix, that would help an R&D guy in deciding and selecting different raw materials versus different attributes one needs to put into the formulations. If you look on the leftmost column, the different attributes are listed, and I've just selected 3 or 4 different alternate materials of each category. Maybe 4 pigments, 4 wetting agents, 4 humectants, and so on. So you keep marking them whether it is suitable for the particular attribute we are looking at not, and then decide on the combination of raw materials that one should select in formulating a particular product. Obviously, at the last is the cost, which would govern whether you need gold all the time. We need the best performance, but can we afford it all the time? And that's where the cost comes into effect, and we need to moderate depending on the type of raw materials we need to put versus the attributes we wish to have in the formulation. This is as far as technology is concerned. But is it important for every paint manufacturer to manufacture the colorant? Should we manufacture it ourselves? Should we buy from others? If we manufacture it ourselves, it should be our own standalone proprietary colorant, or it should be mapped to something which is easily available in the market. Similarly, if you're buying, it should be proprietary to us, or it is something which is generally available, what we call as clones of available colorants. Let's briefly understand what are the challenges and the positives of each of these possible alternates in getting a machine colorants into a system. Sorry for that. When I say standalone, and we are making a colorant which is standalone, what I mean by that is, it's a formulation which nobody else offers into the market, which is typically done by the large companies, be it Asian Paints or Berger or Nerolac. Their colorant systems are their own proprietary formulations. Others might be copying it, but then they have got their own formulations, and all their paint bases, all their formulations, all their database is mapped with respect to the colorant that they are making. If you were to make a standalone colorant, the biggest advantage is it is a self-sustaining system because these formulations were developed from scratch. There is a control on the selection of raw materials, which is the biggest advantage in selecting the raw materials and imparting the right property that we want in the colorant. The database one makes using these selected raw materials in a standalone system will be very robust, and it's really solid. Any change in the raw material or in the formulation can very well be controlled by the manufacturer because everything is under their control. Finally, the cost. It is decided by the company which is making a standalone system, so it is also possible for them to control the cost of this system. What are the challenges? It's not that easy to make your own proprietary standalone colorant. It calls for a very evolved and complex supply chain management. If you want to make 16 colorants, easily one would be adding anywhere between 25 to 30 additional raw materials. Some of them will be in very small quantities that one needs to purchase, otherwise one cannot complete the entire range of 16 colorants. So supply chain is the biggest challenge that one has to go through. Second one is, because it is standalone, one has to provide the database to the customers. That means an evolved database management system and capability to supply the tinting formulation must exist with the industry. More importantly, every time a new product is introduced or a new fan deck is introduced, one has to give additional database. It also calls for a commercial viability unless the volume of the colorants that one needs to make is huge. If the volume is not huge, this entire process, if the volume is not huge, this entire process is just not viable. Let's look at, we make the colorants, but we do not make it as standalone. We take somebody else's colorant as a reference and try to make it ourselves. The biggest advantage is it is easy to commercialize because we already have a reference standard, and what are we going to do is just copy or take that colorant as a standard and then incorporate the right pigmentation and the other additives required to get the properties and match it. Since it is matched to somebody else, the database is readily available. You need not have an evolved color laboratory to provide the tinting formulation support. Obviously, there will be limited investment in manpower and in the laboratory support. The challenges, it's not always accurate. Copy करना तो आसान है, but 100% copy करना इतना आसान नहीं है. You just can't do it. Otherwise, there will be 10 different Asian paints already existing here. It's not possible to copy and clone 100%. So any small changes will have its own effect on the performance of the property. There is always a threat of new product introduction, new shade card introductions. You are depending on somebody else to provide the database because आपके पास वो capability नहीं होती है because you copied somebody else. Let's look at, we do not make it, but we buy from somebody else. This is good when the volume requirements are limited, but we still want to be unique. We do not make it, but buy it from a third-party source, and it is unique. It is not readily available, or it is not offered by other paint companies. The advantage is the vendor from whom you are sourcing it is responsible for giving the shades. So there is a good database support available, and there are no internal rejections. In the earlier two stages, in the earlier two cases, अगर आप colorant अपने से बनाते हो और अगर batch बिगड़ जाती है, तो you have no option but to use it internally. But when you buy it from outside, you have an option of rejecting it and then accepting it what is meeting the standards. So positive, of course, is no internal rejections. The database is offered, and it is not copied or cloned to any other existing paint industry. But the challenges, obviously it's going to be expensive. You're going to buy from somebody else. The manufacturer might demand on a minimum quantity of take. There are other add-on costs like transportation costs and so on. And the system may be offered to some other competitor of ours. So the vendor might be giving the similar system to different paint industries. To that extent, again, it becomes, if not a copy, but a duplication of the same system existing in the marketplace. And the last one is to buy a cloned system. This is very easy. कुछ नहीं करने का है. Somebody is making a copy of an existing colorant. So we buy that. There is a ready-made database. Buy the colorant. Database is available. Sell it along with your paint. It looks easy, but then what are the difficulties? What are the challenges? The biggest one is you do not have a technology base. You are not standing on a firm ground. You are piggy-banking on somebody else's technical skills and depending on somebody else to offer the base, somebody else to offer the colorant and the database. If any of those things changes, the whole system would collapse. More importantly, for our industry to be of repute, people must accept it as an industry which is technically savvy and technically capability. So if you keep on copying, the normal tag that one would have is it's not a technically capable company. So this is a disadvantage of copying. It's very easy. It is okay for industries which do not have the wherewithal to bear the supply chain challenges, the technological input required, or invest in color development and so on. So for industries very small in nature with limited number of outlets, this is an option that can be tried out. But as the industry grows, definitely one must graduate to a higher level of being self-sufficient. If I were to put it into a matrix, the same thing what I've said all this time now, standalone is good when the volume is very high. The industry should have sufficient technical resources, should have a good laboratory setup to provide the database support. There should be sufficient space available to make the products and so on. Cloning, volume can be reasonable. If the volume is high, you have to go for a standalone. If the volume is reasonable, just clone something which is easily available so that there is no need for a lab support to give the tinting formulations. Ability to salvage the off-spec material still lies. If you make a product, whether it is a standalone or a clone, if something goes wrong, you should be in a position to salvage. On the other hand, if you buy from a third party, which is a standalone, it's much better, but you should have the ability and the appetite to absorb the additional cost of the tinter. That is the biggest challenge of buying something which is standalone. We need to have a good collaboration with the vendor who would support you all the time when there is a need for a new shade introduction or whenever a new product is introduced into the market. In absence of that, just buying a standalone colorant would not really help you. Finally, if somebody is cloning and you're buying a clone material, it's good for small volumes, basically with industries having limited or no technical abilities. Basically, the small startups do not have these capabilities, but still want to offer multiple shades to the customer, can follow this route. No color lab is required, few dealer outlets, and hence this kind of an arrangement, which I would call purely as a stopgap arrangement, would help in meeting the requirements of an industry. So in short, once you decide to go and manufacture a machine colorant particularly, I'm not talking about in-plant or stainers. if you venture into making machine colorants, it is just not the technology one should be concerned with. Technology is not that difficult. Once you put the matrix and understand what attributes one needs to have for the product, which correct raw materials one need to decide, multiple people can guide you as to how to make it. But the larger decision lies in commercial aspect of it. The technical support that one needs to give once we introduce a machine colorant into the market, or to what extent we depend on other industries to support the database, to support the fan deck, to support the color requirements of the customer, would decide whether we should venture into making machine colorants or not. Thank you very much. Any questions?
I'm a pigment dispersion manufacturer. We are very small scale manufacturer. So we are planning to making machine colorant. Should we go for that or?
Well, nothing stops you from going for that. But you must be aware of the fact that just because you have the technology to disperse pigment and make a machine colorant is not the end of it. The customer would depend on you. You would fall under the category of buying a standalone system. So you must have the capability to provide support with respect to database formulations and also with respect to having a good compatibility across wide range of products. The dispersion would be sold to multiple customers. So their formulation might be different. Somebody might be having a vinyl acrylic emulsion, somebody might be having a styrene acrylic, Vivova, pure acrylic, so on and so forth. In some industries, the alkyd is more prominent for tinting rather than an emulsion. So the compatibility across wide range of formulations is important. So your dispersion must withstand that test of wide range of compatibility, and there is always a need for supplying the database. If you do not have the internal capability to supply the database and support your customers, probably the customer will be disillusioned because the onus of then getting the database lies on the customer. The very fact that he is buying from somebody else is he wants to outsource the entire activity of color offering to the customer. That's the point. So that's where you need to be clear whether making a dispersion is no big deal. Once you have the formulation, anybody can make it. It is sustenance of making and selling and continuously selling to the customer is more challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So I now want to request, please help me to welcome on stage Yogesh Sangvi. Mr. Yogesh Sangvi, sir, please come on stage in order to felicitate, to say thanks. Is he here, Mr. Yogesh Sangvi? Well, yes, sir. Please come on stage. Please felicitate, say thanks. Thank you so much for this wonderful information. We really enjoyed. And I think this was the last presentation. So please come. You have to give the memento, the token of love. And so this was the last presentation of the day. It's time for some entertainment and of course a motivational session. First of all, biggest round of applause for them. Now the energy is back. As I said, it's time for the entertainment.